So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about you getting models as owners of facilities and how do you make sure those models are any good for you. And so I'm going to walk you through some tools to do that. Just a disclaimer, you don't need to know anything about Revit to be in this class, so don't be worried about that at all. In fact, it's been designed that way to accommodate people who know nothing about Revit. So we're going to talk about how can you check these models, make sure they're compliant with your requirements, and then what are the utilities you can use to do that. All this stuff's free, by the way. Everything I'm going to show you today is free. Okay, so there's our agenda. I'm going to talk about these two utilities, the model checker and the configurator. We'll do some best practices, tips and best practices for that. And then we'll wrap up. I'll give you some next steps, and we'll be done by lunch. Okay, a little bit about me. I work at a company called CAD Microsystems. We do a lot of consulting for owners. We're based in Washington, D.C., so we spend a lot of time with federal government, higher ed, even private owners like property management companies, helping them implement BIM. And so I oversee the team that does that. No laughing. Nobody got the joke? Okay. It's actually not a joke. My wife and I have this talk all the time about the dog, calling it Kobe. Do a lot of work with Kobe. Spend a lot of time with Kobe. So let me do a quick poll here. So how many of you are now currently getting Revit models for your facilities? Just about everybody. Okay, good, good. Who has no idea what to do with these models? Okay. All right. How many of you spent a ton of time reviewing these models and you're not even sure that when you're done reviewing them that they are the way you want them to be? Okay, good. All right, you're in the right spot. Okay, so let's talk about this model checker. So we developed this model checker to help with exactly what we just talked about. It's an add-in that sits on top of Revit. It works for all the old versions of Revit, so you don't have to worry about that. It allows you to kind of load in what you want to check. So it's a shell application, and then you load in a configuration file, and that configuration file has all the checks to find it. Look at this model, look at all these aspects of the model, and then generate a report of that. And let me know what happened. Did it pass or fail? And it generates this nice, clean report in HTML format, or you can copy and paste it in a Word or wherever you want it in an email. That report actually stays with the model. So as the model travels, anybody can open up that report at any time and look at it and see how it complied with it. And it has batch checking built in. I could do 1,000 models and just send it and just let it go and come back after lunch and see what happened with it. It also checks the links in them, right? So I have one model, and architectural model, and they've linked in MEP and structure. It'll check all of those together for you. This is an Autodesk product. Well, interesting thing about that, though, is my company, CAD Microsystems, was hired by Autodesk to make an Autodesk product. Autodesk said, you guys are the experts in this. We can't get our Revit teams moving fast enough to accommodate owners. Can you guys do this for us? It's pretty impressive stuff, actually. If you think about it, that'd be like Ford going to Elway dealership and saying, can you design the next sports car for Ford? Because you guys are really good at it. And that's essentially what happened with this. So we designed it, we built it, and we maintain it completely. It's free for everybody to download and use because Autodesk pays us to do it. So you guys don't have to incur any costs. Includes full help desk support for it, phone or email support. We do screen sharing too if we need it. And then from a management standpoint, this can be configured so that everybody who actually has it can share the same resources on it. If I've built a set of checks that I want to use, everybody in my entire department and entire university can see those same checks immediately. And also from an IT standpoint, it can just be pushed out and installed across dozens, hundreds of machines in a couple minutes by your IT staff. Okay, why is it great? I love this slide. There's a lot of reasons why it's great. So you don't need to know Revit to run this. If you understand Microsoft Windows enough to launch a piece of software and hit the open button, that's about all you need to do. I'm suspecting most of you can do that. The time savings is unbelievable. I can check a model, an enormous model, for hundreds and hundreds of settings and features and aspects in just a few seconds with it. Generates nice detailed reports. Those reports show you specifically down to the element what is the problem, and what is passing. You have to think of this big picture. This isn't just about you checking models. This can be incorporated into your workflow to actually have your design teams, your outside consultants, check the models, and as part of their submission, they give you a report that passes. Think how much time that saves you. Put the onus on them to do this. We will see later on. You can build your own checks. It's simple. It's a little wizard. You just asks you some questions. You say yes, no, whatever, and it comes back and builds checks for you. Again, you don't have to know Revit that well. And then, as we talked about, you can share this with everybody. So as soon as you create one, everybody has access to it in that case. What can it do? So I have a list of items in here I want to talk about. So it can look in your model and see if something was actually modeled. So if your requirements say you got to model ceilings, hopefully they just didn't draw some lines to look like a ceiling grid. They actually put in a real ceiling object, right? And it can check that. Did they actually model shutoff valves? I don't know, but this can run through and check that. Imagine trying to look through a giant model and find all the shutoff valves. It can be difficult. It can check if parameters exist. If you guys have custom parameters, that shutoff valve may have a shutoff. That was interesting.
Can I jump in while you're doing that?
Yeah.
So one of the advantages to Revit versus, say, CAD is line work that you associate to a layer, and if it's on the right layer, it will have information. Revit is object-based, so there isn't layers. You can't put it in the wrong place. So the ability to use this tool is legitimate, whereas if you try to do it in a CAD drawing, it depends if the CAD guy did it the right way. Mm-hmm. So you can't fake it in Revit. So there's an opportunity.
So often you will have your own custom parameters. Parameters are the data fields that you want to track in your model. And of course, this model, you want to pass that data eventually to O&M, so you're managing the building. And there's some very specific information that you want to track. So part of your requirements would say, make sure these data fields are associated with the model so that during design and construction and commissioning, data gets put into those fields. Well, it can't be put in those fields if those fields don't even exist. So this can run through your model and see, did they add them? That's part of my requirements. If they did add them, is there any data in there? Right? It can come back and say, no, they left the fields blank, and tell you that. Maybe they have data in there, but did they format it right? You can do all kinds of wildcard things to say, yes, they put the data in there, but did they put it in the right format for me? Maybe that's an omni-class number that you require for classification. Maybe you guys have a specific way that you do IDs of your assets, and it follows a standard naming convention. You can build that convention into here so it can come back and say, somebody didn't follow that. They didn't put that in there correctly. It can generate reports on quantities. So think of this as a semi-automated process. They might give me a model, and I might say, well, just generate a report of kind of the major elements, and it comes back and says there's only 4 doors in the model, and the model's 200,000 square feet. So nothing failed there, but what a big red flag that comes up and says, wait a second, I know that there should be more than 4 doors modeled in this thing. It can generate reports on specific model settings, right? So it's great that you have a model with everything modeled right, but that actual model file needs to be set up a certain way based on your requirements. So it can look at that and make sure they set up a certain way and they didn't add all kinds of extra stuff. Or, one thing we see all the time has to do with phasing. So you know the phase something is created and the phase something is destroyed, essentially, and any phases in between that. And so did they put it on the right phase for that project, which may just be existing now that it's an as-built model. So it can check all of that. So it can check both real-world elements in your model, right? Doors, ceilings, mechanical equipment, think of managed assets, essentially. But it can also check things that are specific to Revit, like the views and the sheets and the levels. So you can make sure that those were set up right, so that the model is consistent from model to model, because that's really what you want. Whether or not you're going to do anything with these models in the next 5 years, you're going to be building a library of models, and you want to make sure they're all standardized and consistent so that when you are ready to pull the trigger and start doing stuff with them, to start using them on O&M type things, that they're all the same, and you don't have to go back and clean them up.
Or that they're real. Sometimes people put in fake schedules.
Yes.
Excel spreadsheet somewhere else, import, put it in, but it's not tied to the model.
All right, what can't it do? It's really just a couple things it can't do. It can't compare two elements together. So I use this example right here. It can't tell me if that door is too close to the wall, right, an ADA code check. It can't really compare those together. It doesn't have that capability. And really, it's not because the model checker couldn't do that. It's because the Revit API, or the programming interface, doesn't allow for things like that. And the other thing is it's not really an LOD review tool. This is clearly a tool meant more for data, which is more important for owners. So it can't look at that plumbing fixture and go, oh, that was LOD 300 versus 200, and you required 300 on your requirements. So it can't really do that. We actually are working on a tool for this with Autodesk. Okay, so how does it work? It's pretty simple. You open up Revit and you open a model, right? And then you click the one button to say launch the model checker. After that, you choose your configuration file. The configuration file has all the checks you want. Could have one check, could have 100,000 checks. It's totally up to you. You just run it, you say run it, and you pick what it's running on. Is it just running on the model you opened, or do I just go pick a whole bunch of other models and say run it on all of those as well? And then you get your report. So that report then is a snapshot in time of where that model stood, and it has all kinds of data on what time it was and what configuration file. And like I said before, that is saved in the model itself, so it can travel with the model. All right, let's look at it. Enough talking. Let's jump into Revit. Okay, so I have a model here. This is actually the building Revit is developed in outside of Massachusetts. Yep, in Waltham, that's the building.
I have to throw in the interjection about, so one of the things that we always check is, because Revit is geospatial.
Right.
As opposed to AutoCAD wasn't ever geospatial, which means it exists somewhere on a coordinate system somewhere, state plane, whatever it may be. One of the first checks we do with architects is that to see where the building is, because a lot of them hadn't been used to that process. And if it defaults to Waltham, Mass, which is the default in the software, that means they didn't move the building to where it's supposed to be.
Unless, of course, they're using this building, which is in Waltham, Mass, and is geolocated for that. But that's so true because so much in Revit is dependent on where that building is. Revit knows the latitude, longitude, the angle to true north, and the elevation above sea level. And it knows all that for all the buildings. How else could you do energy studies without that data? And that's what Revit is great at.
Or if you want to drop it into a GIS plan that's on state plane, here in Colorado,
So I open up Revit, I clicked on my add-ins tab. This is an add-in to Revit, and I say, here's the model checker, a couple buttons. I go to configure it. And like I mentioned before, it's kind of a shell. I have a configuration file loaded in here. But when I go to open, I get to choose where my configuration file is. And what's interesting about this is we actually give people these configuration files. It's actually pulling from our website. So as we continue to make these, the next time you open this, you'll see a whole bunch more in here. And Autodesk continues to pay us to make more and more of these. And there's a lot of really good ones in here that are just general model things. May not be specific to your requirements, but may overlap a lot. If you set it up, you can have all your checks for your entire organization, your entire university sitting right here. Every time somebody opens it, it'll look on your network and fill in that folder. Or you can just browse and find whatever you want in this case. I'm just going to do it by family category. So it loads up the check file. It tells me where that file is located. You can see it's pulling from the website right there. And then I can go look at what it's looking for. So air terminals, right? Ceiling diffusers, things like that. What's it looking for? It's looking to see that they were actually modeled. It's looking to see that they each have their own unique identifier. That's the mark. And a type identifier. So all ceiling diffusers of the same type have an identifier as well. Something I can track. It looks to see that somebody didn't put some in that had the word generic or default in the name. that it's actually something specific. And then assembly code generally is the omni-class number, the uniformat number assigned to it. So these are just some of the examples you can get. Some other things you can do when you set up your own checks is you can designate whether they're required or optional. You can choose whether or not you want people to see that in here. And then, once the checks are built, then you can say, like I am right now, which checks do I want to run? I can turn them on or off with the little checkboxes to say, yes, I want to look for that right now, or I don't want to look for that. It's really simple. I'm just going to keep it the way it is right here, and I'm going to run it. And so when I go to run it, it says, all right, you got this model open. Is that what you want? Do you want to add other models? Do you want them to check all the links in the models or not? And I could just run it. So it's going to go through, I think there's something like 250 checks in that file that I just opened up. And it's going to go through this whole model and look at every single one of those checks. And when it's done, it's going to pop up this report. And that report then, like I mentioned before, there's a View Last Report button up here that I could open up at any time. It's saved with the model itself. And you can see, because at least one check failed, the entire report failed. Tells me when it was run, where's the model, what date it was run, where's the configuration file that was used for it. If I had multiple models, they would each be a tab right here. So each one would have its own tab, and I could jump between the tabs to see what's happening with those models very quickly. If I want to see what failed, I can expand any of these and take a look, and it says, all right, so these columns failed because they didn't have a unique identifier value assigned to them. So each of those 3 columns doesn't. Let's break it, because that's always fun. So I'm just going to, for simplicity, I'm going to pick on this door. This door has a mark, a unique identifier. It's door 111 in here. I'm going to just get rid of that. And I'm going to purposely zoom out, because I want to show you something that happens here. I'm going to run the exact same thing. I'm not even going to change my configuration file. I'm going to run the exact same thing, because one of the sections I have is all about doors and finding that mark value in here. I want an identifier for each door. And so it's going to come up and it's going to tell me that doors have failed. Probably should have made one that had less checks in it. So it'd be, 3 seconds instead of 30 seconds. So look under exterior doors. So I have a failure because that door, that 72 by 102 door, has an empty mark value. But what's great about this is, all right, what door is that? Let me just hit the show button right here. And it actually zoomed right to it and highlights that door and tells me exactly where the problem one is. So that dialog box that comes up, that report, is called modeless. I can actually, while it's still here, I just minimized it, I can actually go edit this door right from here and continue walking through the report to go make changes to the model.
Another reason why you want to give it to your consultant to use is because you don't want to fix their model. You want them to fix their model.
Exactly. So, like I mentioned, at any point, I can view that last report. It just pops it right up. It's saved with the model. If I open the sample file, it actually downloads the model that you see right here. You can get that from our website as well. But otherwise, it's configure and run. 2 simple pieces to do that. Anybody think they could use this? I thought so too. We've actually been developing this since 2011. So this isn't brand new. This is version 5 of it. And we originally developed it only for the Army Corps of Engineers to follow their BIM requirements. And so you didn't have configuration files. You just open out, it was the Army Corps model checker. And that was it. And eventually we expanded it. And that's why you'll actually see under our configurations that come with it, you'll actually see the Army Corps one in there. Notice there's also a COBE one. So one of the utilities we create is a COBE extension. So after you set up your model and people are adding COBE data, you can go back and run the model checker to see that there's valid COBE data inside of there for it. So everything's kind of interconnected that way. There's also lots of, I shouldn't have closed out of that. I'm just too excited about it. There's also lots of good general checks, right? So can I just look and see that there's no duplicate elements in the model? You wouldn't even know that somebody modeled a column on top of another column until you started to generate reports on that. Other things. Did they make these in-place families, which are kind of performance killers, and you really don't want people to do a lot of those? Are they using generic models for a lot of things? So not everything is a pass-fail. Some things are reports. Just give me a report on what's in here. That's a report on the element level. There's a general model report one that comes with it. And so what this will do is tell me, can anything be purged? How many warnings are associated with this model? What's the size of the model? Right, this is great data to have for these things. And of course, all of these checks that you see right here, you can steal and build your own configuration file for yourself. There's an easy way to pull from all these other configuration files and build your own the way you want it. We'll see that here in a couple minutes. All right. So let's talk about the configurator. How do you build your own checks? Right? How do I make whatever checks I want and set them up the way I want it? So in that same method as before, what is it? So the configurator is just a little app that runs in Windows. You don't have to have Revit. It just opens up, and that's where you can start to build these things. Everything you build is in XML format. Everybody familiar with XML? It's like an open source database format related to HTML, which all web pages are built in for the most part. So that means that you can actually, it works with any version of the model checker. So this is not version specific XML format. I can create it and work on any version of the model checker. I don't have to worry about, I'm in Revit 2014, I made it for 2017. You don't have to worry about any of that. Again, this is an Autodesk product. It's free, includes full support in here, and can be pushed out. Same as all the utilities can be that way. I'm showing you 2 of the 4 that we have. All right, why is it great? So the API, the application programming interface in Revit is Autodesk's way to let anybody modify Revit the way they want. Right? Of course, you have to do that in C#, .NET programming, but it's a very powerful tool, and so it's built on top of that. You have 2 ways to build your checks. You have a very simple wizard interface. Just ask me some questions, and when it's done, the check is built. And that will cover probably 80% of what you want to do. But there is also this great advanced interface. So when you really start to get into it, you can really drill down and get some very complicated checks on elements based on a filter, based on types, and so on. And so there's an advanced interface for it as well. You already saw a list of 6 or 8 sample ones. There's another 30 on the website that you can download, some single ones, so you can open it up and take a look at it and see how they're configured for that. And those are all available for free. All right, so what can it do? It builds these in XML format. And what's great about that is I could build a check. Let's say, look for all door fire ratings. But then I could go into an XML editor, could just be Notepad, and I can just copy and paste. I could do it in Word. Copy and paste that line over and over again and change the word from doors to walls to whatever I wanted. And actually duplicate those things very quickly in just a text editor. You can organize how your checks are set up, drag and drop editing, simple stuff. It's like creating folders in Windows. And there's a whole bunch of extra features I'll show you about with icons and graphics you can add to kind of spruce it up. Don't panic. You don't need to know any of this. But what this is saying is that regular expressions, which is a Microsoft coding language, if you will, or regex, is completely supported. So if you want really advanced wildcards, look for this, not that, look for a number or a letter in this sequence, uppercase, lowercase, any combinations of those wildcards are supported in regex. This is pulled right off a website, so there's a whole thing. It's not just give me an asterisk, That's one way to say wildcards, but there's a bunch of different methods you can use. All right, what can't it do? Really just the one thing is, if I build a check with the wizard, I can't go back and edit a check with the wizard. Wizard's just kind of a builder. It goes back to the advanced interface to edit a check. Most of the time, it's pretty clear what you need to edit in it. But you can always just go back and recreate it in the wizard. It's really simple. All right, so how does it work? You start it, pretty easy. There's some general settings that you put in. in the beginning, and then you build kind of your organization. Where am I going to house all these checks in it? Build your checks, and then you export it. And that becomes your XML file for it. Let's do it. I'm excited. Okay, so again, I don't need Revit. I'm just going to launch the configurator here. Pretty simple dialog box, and give it a name. I'll call it the CFTA 2016. Check. So these are my basic settings. So the icon, you can actually change the icon that's shown up in the corner, so you could really customize it for your university. There's also, when you run the model checker, there's a graphic that sits here. Again, you can control what that image is so that it looks like your stuff. The sample model, if you wanted to download a sample model, you can. Here's that required or optional setting. If you want to see those things, you can do that very easily. You jump it in the check builder, and so just like you're looking at Windows Explorer, here's my organization. Here are my folders over here, and here are my checks or my files on this side. So I can have a header, a section. I can create multiple sections, sections within sections, sections at the same level. It's really simple, and I can go in and name them and give them a description. It's easy. The thing you'll notice as well is that, let me just trash this one. I can drag and drop these around to different locations, different settings. It's really simple to drag and drop. And of course, delete them. And the other thing you'll notice is that I can control whether that section runs by default. Is it checked? When somebody loads this configuration file, is that one checked or not checked? And that's really all it is. So when I add a check, it says, do you want to do the wizard interface? Do you want to do the advanced interface? So let's go through the wizard. Let's do one and use it on this building. Let's look at mechanical equipment and see that somebody put an identifier in mechanical equipment. So it says, am I just looking at the model as a whole? Am I looking at elements in the model? That's what we're doing here. Am I looking at annotative elements in the model, tags and text and things like that? Am I looking at datum or location elements? And we tell you levels, rooms, grids, areas, what that means. Am I looking at views or sheets? So it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to do model elements, and it says, are you looking for architectural, MEP, or structural elements? Let's do MEP. So if I find any elements matching my criteria, it'll fail. So if my criteria is find anything that has a blank identifier, that should fail. So I don't want blanks. And so then it tells me, here's the MEP elements associated with a model. Right? So mechanical equipment, I'll pick that. Easy enough. And obviously I can pick multiple ones in here. At any point I can go backwards, start over, it's easy. Now it says, what do I want to do? Do I just want to see that somebody actually modeled mechanical elements, or do I want to look at some of the data on them? Let me look at the data. And now I can filter it. Do I want to look at just all mechanical elements, or do I want to fine tune that, or do I want to look at certain data or all the data? So usually you're going to filter it. And so you get just options in here. What is it in a certain location? Is it on a certain phase? Does the family have a name of it? Family is the overall definition of that piece of equipment. What floor is it on? Is it in a work set? You don't have to worry about that. That's how we work in it. But I'm going to look at a parameter. And so I could type in what that parameter is. The parameter is called mark in Revit. It's pretty simple. And I just want to make sure it's not empty. But you can see all these different ways of controlling what I'm looking for when it comes to a mark. So I could add another filter, and I could say, look for a mark that meets this format. Make sure it's there, but also make sure it's 3 characters or 1 letter and 2 numbers, right? And I can control that by adding another filter in here. I'm going to say I'm done here. I'll give it a name. Let's just call it mech. Equipment. I'm not going to give a description. All right, I'll do this. You failed. How about that? All right, so I finish. So it immediately goes to the advanced interface. That's what the advanced interface is. It's not that complicated. Look at mechanical equipment and see that the mark has no value. I mean, I guess it's advanced. It can get a lot more complicated than that, but it's not too difficult to figure it out just looking at it. And it builds the code down below. If the category is mechanical equipment, that's true, and the parameter mark has no value, true, that's what sets us off. So it's pretty simple to see and read. All right, I'm just going to save this. most of the time, you don't need, let's call it CFTA. You don't need to export unless you've defined things like the icons and the images and things like that. If I'm just making an XML file, I can just save it, exit right out of here, go right in. I don't even have to restart. I'll just go to Open and Browse and find that one, CFTA. There it is. Hit OK. Mechanical equipment. I didn't give it any descriptions. I should have typed in all that stuff, but I ignored it. I'll finish it and I'll run it. Whoop, not configure it. I will run it. This will be fast, right? It passes. So all the mechanical equipment in my entire model has a unique identifier in it. Let's break it, right? I got some rooftop units in here, some condenser units. Let me grab that condenser unit. It's labeled as ACC3. And it's not labeled anymore. So again, I go run my check. I run the reports, comes back, it fails because that mechanical equipment has failed. And let me show it. Right? It couldn't be any easier to do that. Just like how Brian was showing Dynamo and how easy it is to do this kind of visual programming, you don't need to know Revit to do any of this stuff in here. All right. So some tips and best practices with it. And of course, this presentation is going to be available, so don't worry about writing everything down. They're recording it. The PowerPoint will be available. But start small. I did a very small check there, but it was simple. It was easy. Everybody understood it, right? And that's a great way to do that. But you could create dozens of those things. Keep it simple. Getting multifaceted checks can sometimes get you down a rabbit hole. You don't really know what you've created, what's failing and what's not failing. General checks versus element checks. General checks look at the model as a whole. Give me some reports on numbers of things that are in there. Tell me can anything be purged, so on. Element checks is what we just created, which is look at a specific type of element and tell me something about it. The configuration files. So there's a folder that gets created on your hard drive that has your templates in it. Remember when I pick a configuration file, and the top were the ones on our website, the middle was blank, and then I browsed to the third one? That middle blank area is just pointing to this folder. There's an INI file that's included with Model Checker that you can edit and point that to wherever you want, just like you do in Revit if anybody's ever done that. Don't move them. The Model Checker looks for it every time you open it. Every time that model opens and you hit configure, it'll try and find that configuration file again. It remembers it. Every time you make a change, check or uncheck one of those marks, it wants to save over top of it. So just be careful you're not saving over your kind of master version of that. You want to save a copy of it. So one thing that Revit has as part of the software developers kit, which is free to anyone, is this thing called the lookup tool. It lets you pick on an element, and it will pop up a window with all this crazy data in it. Obviously, if I pick on something, there's a properties window, and I can see those properties. That's kind of the layperson's version of data. But the lookup tool will look at data that you don't actually have access to, or that you can't actually edit, but you can still run model checks on it. And so that's a great tool to use for that. It's free. You can Google it, and you'll find it. So sometimes you got to think like Revit on some of these things. For example, walls. They have a function parameter, and it's a drop-down list, and you only get 6 options in that list. But you can't say, look for wall function that equals interior. It doesn't know that. It thinks of it as, well, that was the first option, so I'm going to put it at 0 or 1 or 2. So every once in a while, it'll keep failing and be like, well, why is that? Because if it's a predefined value, it's the number of the value. So Revit kind of thinks that way with it. Revit also thinks in feet all the time. So you have to be aware of that. AutoCAD, it typically thinks in inches, and so it's a little different that way. Metric can be a mess sometimes because of the conversion. Metric drawings are often in millimeters, but if Revit's thinking in feet, that's a very small number of millimeters, especially if you have a long distance. If I want to find all walls that are less than 4 feet high, make sure they have a cap on them or something like that, then you really have to round further than 5th decimal place for it to be accurate in there. All right, how are we doing? I cruised through that. good. You all want to eat. Okay, where do you get them? So you can certainly go to Autodesk's website and download these tools, but if you go to this website, the BIM interoperabilitytools.com, I always have to say it slow, you get not only the install files, you get sample files, help pages, videos, quick start guides. It's a ton of stuff up there. It's all free for you guys to get to. So that's the website that hosts all of it. So as an example, that's the website. I click on the model checker configurator. Here's some features. Here's the installation files. Look at all these sample files. If you don't want to download them one by one, you can download a zip file with all of them in it. And then there's a complete set of help pages up here. So here's the quick start guide. This walks you through how to use it, talks about all the different features of it. So all of that is up there. If you click on support anywhere, I'll do the model checker. If I click on support, right, you can call or email us to get support on it. The other thing I should mention, all 4 of these utilities, we've only talked about 2 of them today, all of them know what the latest version is, so you're always up to date. If you launch it, it'll say, hey, a new version came out. Do you want to download it now? One button click and I'll download it for you so you can install it right there. All right, what are your next steps? Well, obviously download them. I mean, simple, come on. Use them. Put them to work. Do something with it. You can contact me directly if you ever have questions. That's my email. I'm always connected, unfortunately. And then, of course, with all the time you saved, what are you going to do with all that time? There's a suggestion for you.
AR.
Yep. Exactly. Just ties into the whole theme, right? All right, very good. Any questions? Good. I'm glad that helped. Obviously, there's a lot more to implementing BIM than just checking your models. So if you ever have questions outside of that, that is what we do. Come talk to me. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Can you check duplicate geometry between 2 models?
Do we need this to be able to hear that?
No. So the question was, can you check duplicate geometry between 2 models? Revit doesn't see those as duplicates. So if you link them together and they were on top of each other, it won't do that, unfortunately. You'd have to merge the models together and then run the check to see. Any other questions?
There are some other softwares like Solibri that do like ADA kind of checks that are more spatial, but they're limited. I like the idea of having an automatic spatial check.
Solibri is very good, very powerful, very expensive software, especially considering free. So, all right, very good. Time to go eat. Thank you, everybody.